All right, let's go back to the libertarian debate, ladies and gentlemen. Here, Austin Peterson, the founder and editor of Libertarian Republic, does what all the key, really, ladies and gentlemen, to being a libertarian is to feeling like you are transcendent of just normal politics. Like you're just, for you, this is an intellectual exercise. And the road and the rubber don't necessarily have to quite meet. So if that's the voter, what do you do if you're the politician who wants to get that voter?
Mr. Peterson.
When faced with a choice of the lesser of two evils, vote for neither. Exit polls in Virginia after Robert Sarvis's race for governor showed that he pulled more from the Democrats than he did from the Republicans. In order to arrive at left or right, you could be born a Republican or a Democrat. But in order to become a libertarian, one must first think to arrive at our positions. And of course, the friends of big governments always look at us libertarians and say, you look like you've had a little too much to think. Vote libertarian.
Ah, you're all super smart. Yes, there you go. I love you people, right? Isn't that what Donald Trump says? Same thing.
Exactly, except with a lot less panache. But,
right.
You know, with a kind of a certain sort of D&D charm that would work well in the libertarian crowd.
Right.
That very like that one must first think. One must spend their time in high school fantasizing furiously about cheerleaders and reading Ayn Rand and building up a glut of fantasies and resentments that culminate in a delusional political stance and then lead you to debate in the stripper capital of the world where they will not take gold bars, the girls.
Yeah, it's very important that you think in becoming a libertarian. And in fact, I would never stop thinking through that issue. And also, you're smart.
Don't stop thinking about tomorrow.
Okay. All right. So,
where's Walter Block? Why isn't he running for president up there?
Well, he's
I know he's for Trump, but it's
Trump.
A shanda for the goyim. He should be running. Walter, do it.
So the entire panel is asked whether or not government should build roads. Now, of course, this is a dilemma for libertarians who think, because they realize that if the market was to determine whether or not roads should be built, then our highway system would be a shadow of what it is. Our road system would be even just like a slice of what it is. Housing density would have to be huge. We'd have vast swaths of land that would be undeveloped. Now, I don't know. I mean, I'm not so sure that wouldn't be so bad if we had just, land undeveloped, untouched, just federally owned land. But I guess presumably in their mind it would be owned by, like Peter Thiel would own, I don't know, half of the land mass of the United States, and we could just go and get maybe hunting permits.
That would be
gunned
by managed by paramilitaries.
Yeah, we would just go and get hunting permits to see if we could take one of Peter Thiel's deer or something to eat. But nevertheless, the best way to answer any question that presents a dilemma to your philosophy as a libertarian, we all know from listening to libertarians who call into this program, is to suggest that some form of a jetpack will make all of this moot.
Mr. McAfee, should government, whether state or local, fund infrastructure, roads, bridges, sewers, electrical grids? And if government does not do it, who or what will?
Each of those are separate problems. We have interstate highways. There are issues involved in right-of-way. and various intricate problems involving eminent domain. So we have to address that differently than local problems. With our solar power and our new technologies, local facilities can be created to generate that. So, but the government should, at the maximum, be involved in the minimum part of this entire issue.
Pause it as they applaud for him. Let me translate what he said. Nothing. Nothing. He might as well have just said, trope. Is trope, can I just say trope? Okay.
Mr. Perry?
I'll do my best to answer this in 30 seconds. We're in a hotel. Hotels thrive on having customers stay in their hotel, which means people need to get to their hotel, which means that people are probably coming to visit and do stuff. All of these places thrive on customers, meaning that they need a flat surface for all of their customers to come and go from. Businesses will be incentivized to have these flat surfaces called roads. We don't need to steal the money. Let the people who thrive from them pay for them. Voluntary.
Okay, so what he's suggesting is in places that attract tourism, you'll be able to get maybe a big hotel company that will pay for a road. Now, do you think the hotel company is going to pay for the road to go anywhere but directly to their hotel? Now, I guess maybe they could get together with maybe a gas station. So it'll be just the road will go past the gas station, and that's about it. The road to the hospital? We're not going to pay for that. Oh, the road from the fire department to anywhere else? We're not going to pay for that. Unless, I know what it is. If you have a fire going on in your house, then you could decide to build a road from the fire department to your house. That could work out well. I mean, you'd have to have, and then think about it. It would create a new business where you need to have cement that it can actually instantaneously be put down on the ground so that fire trucks could get there.
There's a company in Singapore that does this. They use elves
there we go.
who have faster working abilities, and it works better for everyone.
But that gets back. His response is basically a more extreme version of what I was suggesting would have to happen, where if you just had people that were incentivized to pay for the roads. But here we go. That's a more efficient way, incidentally, of doing that, right? Right. If you're a construction company, you just got to hope for someone to build a hotel. But now, why would you build a hotel if there's no road there?
Of course.
Governor Johnson.
Well, infrastructure is the best example of how you can privatize this entire function, and you can do this through user fees to be able to accomplish that. Should government be in charge of that process? Well, you're probably going to have government administrate over it or issue a request for proposal to see this happen. But no, government shouldn't be involved in this. The private sector can be involved in this. Entrepreneurs can be involved in this and can apply the best taxes possible, which are user fees, by those that in fact use the infrastructure.
Pause it. So basically, these special user fees will only go to people who use things like sewerage, or maybe roads, or like police, or fire department. Now, if you're one of those people, you'll pay a user fee. They'll call it a user fee, but you know what it's called? A tax. Good.
Mr. Peterson.
The old who will build the roads. Roads.
Ah, yes.
Where we're
the
going,
old,
we don't need
the old.
road.
Pause it, go back. Oh, the old. Who's going to pay for things in society that we all want? This little chestnut that comes up. Well,
Infidious deductus.
The obvious
Blatantly obvious defoius.
yes.
The completely apparent problem to even the
most simple-thinking people imaginable that interferes with our Scientology-like devotion to this bizarre, creepy neo-feudalism. I'm so glad you brought it up.
I always equate this to that ridiculous question about why can't we fly to the old thing about gravity.
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 To paraphrase Lloyd Benson, a status but a true wit. There you go again.
Peterson.
Ah, the old who will build the roads. Roads, roads, roads. Where we're going, we don't need roads. Because the truth is that in the future we'll have a jetpack. This is unimaginative. They don't see a future where freedom can solve the problems that are created by government. The free market can solve these problems. Take a look at what happened in Hurricane Katrina when people were suffering and there was no electricity. What happened? People stepped in and they started offering generators. And people said, oh, wow, look, they're charging for these generators 2, 3 times more than you might have learned on the free market. But they called them price gougers. But the truth is that supply and demand worked. And looks like I'm out of time, but who will build the roads? Roads. We don't need that. We don't need government to build roads.
Are we not psychic about libertarians?
Now, wait a second.
Oh, my God.
I didn't even know.
Jetpacks.
You had written right here, it was...
Jetpacks.
He said, you said Peterson says we won't need roads. I was guessing about the jetpacks.
I don't understand why you post this.
Been talking about jetpacks for a really long time.
Yeah, because I understand the libertarian brain.
Clearly.
If I understand what Peterson is saying here is that Hurricane Katrina gives us a good model. We're not going to need roads. We're just going to need boats. We're just going to be all living on canals, selling boats at a premium.
Hurricane Katrina
God.
in the aftermath is not a good model for anything.
I love the idea, honestly, that this guy could raise, and there's no doubt in my mind the only time Hurricane Katrina raised in this debate, right?
Jesus Christ.
The only time that it's raised is in the context of coming up with it was a great opportunity to see how well the market works. Unbelievable.
Let me say.
Privatized. FEMA privatized. Private services down the line. The reason why those buses were sitting 3 hours away, 4 hours away, was because the fifth subcontractor who was contracted to get those buses to where they needed to go didn't want to take them out too early, because if it was a false alarm, it would have cut into the profits that they were making on that contract. And so scumbag is a really strong word, but pathological people gathered there. The only lesson they can learn is that the market works when people are desperate. When the power dynamic is such that one person's life is at stake and the other person has a generator or a candy bar, you can make a lot of money out of that.
If Greg runs for president, I will be his campaign manager. I will be his senior strategist. I want him up there explaining why the other guy's jetpack plan is wrong, and also how we can solve all of the problems in the Middle East with said jetpacks and relocating Palestinians to Jordan in a friendly act of ethnic cleansing.
Okay,
I want that. It also reminds me of the Eddie Murphy routine about the kid taunting the other kid for not having any ice cream.
Right.
It's like that's what everything comes down to.
Yeah, basically. All right, here is that other old chestnut. If it's not roads, it's whether or not we can discriminate against black people if we want to. Here is the whole panel addressing whether or not they would have signed the Civil Rights Act.
Oh my God.
Deductus nigris.
Senator Barry Goldwater voted against it for libertarian reasons. He did not feel it was the government's job to tell a private business owner what to do. Senator Al Gore Sr. voted against it because he opposed integration. If you had been in the Senate, how would you have voted?
I would have voted for it.
No elaboration?
Nope.
You still have more time? Okay.
Pause it.
Mr.
The elaboration. Like here you have Larry Elder saying, like, one guy voted because he didn't like black people, but Goldwater voted just because he didn't want to force white people to serve black people.
But he loved black people.
Nope. You still have more time? Okay. Mr. Peterson.
Can you repeat the question one more time? It was kind of
The
winding.
Civil Rights Act of 1964 ended discrimination in both the private sector and the public sector. Senator Barry Goldwater voted against it for libertarian reasons, feeling that it wasn't the government's job to tell a private owner what to do. Senator Al Gore Sr. voted against it because he imposed racial integration. How would you have voted had you been in the Senate?
Wait,
I'm sorry?
you're asking whether or not I would have signed the civil rights legislation in 1964?
1964, yes.
Yes, I would have signed.
Which is what you said, right. Mr. Peterson, would you have signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which ended discrimination in both the public and private?
Pause it. Now he's switched it from would you have voted for it or would you have signed for it? I mean, you understand, like, no, it's not, I know I'm being a little nitpicky here, but these guys are the thinking guys, right? And so Larry Elder says, would you have voted for it? Because he wanted to make Goldwater look like he was voting for it for voting against it for high-minded reasons, as opposed to the Democrat who was simply racist because he's representing a racist. Hey, maybe he's, I don't know, whether I have no investment in it one way or another. We lost a lot of Democrats to the Republican Party because of the Civil Rights Act, among others. But now he's realized that, wait, you're running for president, so you would sign it as opposed to voting for it. I'm being nitpicky here, but, you know, these guys they're at the top of their game.
Which is what you said, right. Mr. Peterson, would you have signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which ended discrimination in both the public and private sectors?
Well, the senator has the power of the filibuster, so I would have filibustered until we abolished Title II, and then we would have gotten rid of the government discrimination.
Dr. Feldman, had you been in the Senate in 1964, how would you have voted on the Civil Rights Act?
I would hope that I would look at it very, very carefully, end government discrimination, and when it came to private discrimination, we need to find what would cause more harm, what would cause less harm, and do what makes life better for people. And that's a very difficult decision.
Pause it. So in other words, even though we signed this bill and passed this bill over 50 years ago, still can't quite figure out whether or not it was better or worse for people. I'm sorry, this is not theoretical enough for me to be able to analyze whether or not it's good for people or bad for people. That's what he's saying. We shouldn't have government discriminate, but we needed to come up with something that was good for people, and I don't have enough data 50 years on. Let's give it another 75 years.
But
and
definitely
see.
won't be like Al Gore's dad, man. Tell you that much. That guy was an asshole. I also, these people want to eliminate all government functions. The civil rights movement was about not just public, but clearly, I mean, what do you think when they were doing sit-ins at diners? That's private entities. So these people say, get rid of government discrimination. They essentially want to scale government down to nothing. So that answer always annoyed me so much. It's so disingenuous. Like, what does government discrimination mean when there's barely any government functions left?
Well, it would be saying like you can't vote if you're black.
So they would support the voting rights legislation.
Well,
but nothing
not
else.
necessarily,
yeah,
because
that's
that
a
probably
violation
went
of
too
states'
far.
rights. Yeah.
But it could be things like if you are, I don't know, getting a driver's license.
But they don't want that. I bet Austin Peters doesn't want driver's licenses anymore in the government's hands. That's inefficient.
We'll get to that later.
There's a difference.
Why do we have that when we can have jetpacks?
All right. Is there any more of that one? Okay.
Mr. McAfee, would you have voted in favor of the 1964 Civil Rights
Now
Act
he's back
had you
to
been in
vote
the Senate?
instead of sign.
As many of you know, my wife is black, and having spent 3.5 years living 24 hours a day with her, I can assure you that legislation in no way ended discrimination. What it did is bring to the awareness that it is here But discrimination will not end until you open your heart and your mind and your judgment to a person of another color, another race, another language, another religion.
Mr.
Pause it. So wait a second. So here's John McAfee, again, not answering the question. It didn't end discrimination. But you know what it did do, John? It made it possible for your wife to stay in the same hotel with you as you go into this convention in Orlando. I have a good reason to believe that Orlando would have been one of those places where your wife would not be able to stay with you. In fact, not only that, my guess is that in Florida, you also would have been breaking state law to marry your wife.
Not if I bought my own hotel, man. Yeah, think about it. I have my own road that black chicks that I'm married to can go on. And then we go to my hotel called the McAfee Loves Black Chicks Hotel and Casino. Just thinking a little big picture here. We go there, and it's an open-hearted place, man. So I think I answered your question.
Mr. Perry.
Allow me to give everyone a history lesson. The segregation in the South was not because necessarily of racist business owners. It was because of racist legislators telling the business owners that they had to segregate the lunch counters. In Virginia, it was business owners that helped the protesters violate the statute by saying, "Come into my business, violate the law." That should have been outlawed. The forced discrimination should have been repealed. That is the only thing the Civil Rights Act should have done.
Allow me to give you a history lesson, and also allow me to tell you it's completely fabricated. It is because the business owners were the most progressive and wanted to open their doors. However, the lawmakers, who we all know were not in any way influenced by the business makers in their communities, had decided completely arbitrarily to outlaw black people from going into their establishments. Therefore, ipso facto, you have reductum ad racism.
Allow me to make Ted Cruz look likable and attractive with a history lesson.
If I may talk down to all of you here by pretending about something that's not true. Oh my God.
I'm the guy that looks like the waiter in a weird off-brand 80s horror film. And I would like my speaking time to explain the problem with the Negro race, or as I call it, a history lesson.
Is the entire audience, when this guy is talking, is the entire audience rolling on the floor laughing? Like, I mean, honestly, like, is there anybody, how did this guy lose? That's what I want to know. How did this guy know?
Well, the dynamic is he's the true libertarian. He announced himself as the libertarian wing of the Libertarian Party.
Oh, touche. I've never, ever, ever heard of a libertarian who said that they're the true libertarian, except for every single libertarian who's ever called this program, which I think is in at least, if not the hundreds, in the
dozens.
Close.
At the bare minimum. And please,
scores.
What's that guy's name again?
Daryl Perry.
Okay, every single person listening to this show needs to immediately start tweeting at that guy because we must have him as a guest. That is an absolute necessity.
Honestly,
he needs to be on this show.
He did a debate on RT hosted by Jesse Ventura's son, Tyrell Ventura, in which he used the phrase "the tyrant Lincoln."
Okay, again, he needs to be on this show. Please start tweeting him. It'll probably take about 3 tweets.
Okay, wait a second. It's also we have more, ladies and gentlemen. And this is like the gift that that keeps on giving. Now, Gary Johnson, you heard what he said about that he would either sign or vote for. I don't know. The question kept changing back and forth. The Civil Rights Act. That apparently was not the most controversial thing he had to say. I just want to tell you that, like, you know, when I lived upstate full time, it was pretty heavily Ron Paul territory. And I remember going to a guy's house and he was selling some peach trees. And I bought a couple of peach trees, and he told me they were not hybrids. They were heritage peach trees. And I wasn't quite sure why this was. I mean, I was like, okay, that's great. Somehow he started telling me about the hybrids that they've created with peaches.
This is going
and how they're problematic. And we're talking. And somehow that ends up being something about him being a libertarian. And I'm like, oh, yeah.
Going further
places. That's not really for me. And he just looks at me and goes, is that your car? And I said, yeah. He was talking about my 2002 Subaru. I don't know when this was, but sweet car. I love that car.
Of course,
And
you
he
would drive
said-
a lesbian car.
No, he said, no, it's not. Take a look at your registration. You're just leasing it from the state. And I'm like, okay. How does that impact at all my use of it? When he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, I can sell it. Well, you're just selling the lease. Okay. I can sell the lease, or I can throw it away. I can do whatever I want with this other than, drive in a way that is outside of the rules. And he's like, do you think you're a citizen of the United States? Yes. No, you're not. You're a citizen of the state of New York. I'm like, okay, thanks for the peach tree. Bye. My neighbor at the time was a Ron Paul fanatic. He then grew up and stopped being that. But they used to have Ron Paul meetups at their house. And apparently that guy had to be kicked out of the group because he was too much. There was nothing they could do. Everything was like, do you think that's your desk that we're all sitting at? Do you think this is your chair? So, just the property of the state.
If you just use it as a tool like that to just sort of generally be annoying, then I would approve of it. That actually sounds pretty funny.
That's the way. That's basically.
You own that, man.
That's the way that you get out of visiting your in-laws. All right, let's.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so here
They
it
don't
is.
want us to come this year.
That's
honey.
a long way of saying this next thing. Gary Johnson went somewhere where no libertarian should, ladies and gentlemen, and they're going to let him know it at the libertarian debate. Here's Gary Johnson, among others. Whole panel answers, but Gary Johnson, among others, who went the wrong way with this one.
Mr. Peterson, I have a feeling I know how this answer is going to be. Should someone have to have a government-issued license to drive a car?
Hell no.
Dr. Feldman.
A car is like a gun or anything else. As long as you're using it right and not using it to hurt other people, you should have a right to use it. A license and a permit is just another way to get some money and inconvenience to people.
Mr. McAfee.
Pause it. Now, there is an alternate theory about licenses that I should make you aware of at this point. That one of the reasons why you issue licenses is to make sure that someone is competent enough to drive. Because to find out after the fact that someone is not competent enough to drive is somewhat problematic to the property or persons who had a direct example of that person's inability to drive. That's just one alternate theory, just so that you have it out there.
McAfee.
I don't think licenses are required. However, if you are under 16 and your parents say you can drive and you haven't done it before, you should put a flashing pink light on your roof at least so we can get out of your way. But that at the most.
Mr. Perry.
The government requires licenses for far too many things. The government requires licenses for people to broadcast radio. The government requires licenses to get married. They require a license to drive. What's next? Requiring a license to make toast in your own damn toaster? Absolutely not.
Pause it. So,
oh damn toaster.
Wait a second. So, marriage licenses, driver's licenses. What was the other license that he said?
Radio license.
Oh, radio licenses. The radio licenses, of course, so that you can actually distribute the bandwidth at certain points. Although I think, they've opened up the low power licenses quite a bit. But, of course, you don't want two people trying to broadcast on the same frequency. Now, radio licenses, I think, are close to 90 years it's been in existence, probably. Maybe a little bit more. Marriage licenses, I imagine, even longer than that. Driver's licenses, I would imagine, around the same amount of time, maybe a little bit older. So this guy's slippery slope, the way it works is the government makes you get a license for, let's say, driving. And then at least 90 years later, it could be your toast.
I mean, true, what's next? Then it will be a bathing suit license before you can swim. This is the logic of government. I'm very concerned about this. And,
all right, but wait,
look,
it
Donald
gets worse.
Trump will be our
but wait
savior,
a second. But wait a second.
He will destroy us.
It's not just that people in this audience are applauding wildly at this nonsense. It's this.
Governor?
I think government has a basic responsibility to protect us against individuals, groups, corporations, foreign governments that would do us harm. In that context, a license to drive, I'd like to see some competency exhibited by people before they drive. As governor of New Mexico, I vetoed a whole lot of bills. I vetoed the haircutting license. I vetoed all sorts of licensing, but license to drive? I mean, you could, arguably, you could have an insurance requirement, I guess, that then the insurance company would determine. I mean, you got people that are blind that would be on the road, I think, that would actually continue to drive until they hurt somebody. I think
we're never going to have jetpacks with this guy.
Obamacare for cars!
Gentlemen, we have come to the end.
Sharia law for vehicles.
Oh, my God.
That's incredible.
Oh, my God. You know what's really upsetting to me? I just don't know how it is that the Republican primary contenders and Democratic primary contenders seem to have skated through their primaries without having to answer that question.
Because they don't think.
The media is just so easy and coddles the two major parties, not making them have to deal with the question of licenses. Unbelievable. Unbelievable.